It was a chilly autumn morning, the kind where you can see your breath in the air but still feel the warmth of the sun peeking through the clouds. Outside Sterling National Bank, leaves swirled around on the sidewalk like nature's confetti. Inside, though, things were polished and pristine. The marble floors gleamed under bright lights and the hum of quiet conversations filled the space. This wasn't just any bank. It was one of the most respected financial institutions in the city, known for its high standards and wealthy clientele. A man walked in through the glass doors. He wasn't flashy or loud, but there was something about him that made people take notice. Dressed in a sharp navy blue suit with perfectly shined shoes, he carried himself with an air of quiet confidence. His posture was straight, his steps steady, and his expression calm. Anyone watching might have guessed he belonged here, among the elite who frequented this place. But looks alone don't tell the whole story. He approached the reception desk where a young woman sat typing away at her computer. She looked up briefly before returning to her screen. "Good morning," he said politely. "I have an appointment with Mr. Whitaker." The receptionist paused mid-keystroke and glanced at him again. There was something hesitant in her smile. "Oh, yes. Let me check." She tapped a few keys, then frowned slightly. "Mr. Whitaker is currently tied up in another meeting. Could you please wait for a moment?" "Of course," he replied, nodding. "I'll just sit over there." She pointed toward the waiting area without looking directly at him. It wasn't rude exactly, just distant, as if she'd already moved on to the next task. He didn't say anything more, simply turned and took a seat in one of the plush chairs arranged neatly along the wall. At first, everything seemed normal. People came and went, chatting softly or scrolling through their phones. A few others waited too, though, not for long. Within minutes, they were called into offices or greeted warmly by staff members eager to assist them, yet no one approached him. An hour passed, then another. Each time he tried to ask the receptionist about his appointment, she gave the same vague response. "He'll be with you soon." By now, the initial politeness had worn thin. He couldn't help but notice how differently some of the other clients were treated. They weren't kept waiting endlessly. No one else endured those awkward glances from employees whispering behind closed doors. And while he didn't want to jump to conclusions, it was hard not to wonder if his skin color played a role in the way he was being handled. Still, he stayed patient. After all, he hadn't come here to cause trouble. He was here because he needed to open a major business account, one worth millions. His company had recently gone public, and it was growing faster than anyone expected. Choosing the right bank was crucial, and Sterling National had always been known for its reliability. So despite the growing frustration bubbling beneath the surface, he decided to give them the benefit of the doubt. But patience has its limits. As the clock ticked closer to 2 hours, he began to question whether this was really the best place for him. Was this dismissiveness intentional, or was it simply incompetence? Either way, it left a bad taste in his mouth. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a door opened down the hall. Out stepped James Whitaker, the senior branch manager. Tall, well-dressed, and exuding authority, he strode toward the waiting area with an air of importance. When he reached the man, he extended his hand with a practiced smile. "My apologies for keeping you waiting," he said smoothly. "Let's get started, shall we?" For a moment, the man didn't move. He studied Whitaker carefully, taking in the rehearsed charm and the faint hint of discomfort behind his eyes. Then, slowly, he stood up. There was a weight to his presence now, a shift in energy that commanded attention. "Apologies are easy to give," he said evenly, his voice steady and measured. "But let's make sure we understand each other clearly before we proceed." And with that, the real meeting began. Not just between a client and a banker, but between two very different perspectives. What happened next would change everything for both of them and for everyone else in the bank. The man followed James Whitaker into his office, a spacious room with large windows that let in the soft glow of the morning sun. The walls were adorned with framed certificates and awards, each one screaming success and professionalism. A sleek, mahogany desk sat at the center, cluttered neatly with papers, pens, and a nameplate that read, James Whitaker, Senior Branch Manager. It was the kind of office designed to impress, but today, it felt less like a place of authority and more like a stage where a drama was about to unfold. Whitaker gestured for the man to take a seat in one of the leather chairs across from him. He settled into his own chair, leaning back slightly as if trying to regain control of the situation. His tone was polite but hurried, the kind people use when they're eager to move past an awkward moment. "Once again, my sincerest apologies for the wait," he said, forcing a smile. "Shall we dive right in?" But the man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked around the room, taking in every detail, the certificates, the polished furniture, the subtle hints of wealth and power. Then slowly he turned his attention back to Whitaker. There was no anger in his expression, just a calm intensity that made Whitaker shift uncomfortably in his seat. "I'm here because I need to open a business account," the man began, his voice steady and clear. "My company has recently gone public, and we're looking for a bank that can handle our needs, both now and as we continue to grow." Whitaker's ears perked up at the mention of a growing company. He leaned forward, suddenly more attentive. "That's wonderful news," he said, his tone shifting from casual to enthusiastic. "We'd be delighted to assist you. Sterling National Bank prides itself on supporting businesses like yours." The man nodded, but didn't break eye contact. "Good, because what I'm about to propose isn't small. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar account, along with plans to transfer all of our existing funds to this institution." If Whitaker had been paying attention before, he was fully engaged now. His eyes widened slightly, and he reached for a pen as if preparing to jot down notes. "This is excellent," he said, his voice tinged with excitement. "You've made the right choice coming to us. We'll ensure your experience is seamless." For a brief moment, the tension in the room seemed to ease. Whitaker was back in his element, ready to close the deal and add another high-profile client to his roster. But just as he opened his mouth to continue, the man interrupted him. "There's something else you should know," he said, his tone unchanged, but carrying a weight that silenced Whitaker instantly. "I chose this bank because of its reputation, for excellence, reliability, and professionalism. Those are qualities I value deeply. But today I experienced something quite different." Whitaker froze, the pen hovering mid-air. His smile faltered, and for the first time, he looked genuinely uneasy. I'm not sure what you mean," he stammered, though his tone betrayed the fact that he knew exactly what the man was referring to. "You kept me waiting for nearly 2 hours. The man continued, his voice calm but firm. 2 hours, Mr. Whitaker. During that time, I watched other clients walk in and out of this office without delay. They were greeted warmly, ushered into meetings promptly, and treated with the respect they deserved. But not me." Whitaker opened his mouth to protest, but the man raised a hand, cutting him off before he could speak. "Let me finish. I understand that schedules get busy and unforeseen circumstances arise, but it's hard to ignore the way I was treated, not just by you, but by some of your staff as well. The whispers, the glances, the dismissiveness, it wasn't subtle." The room grew quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy and suffocating. Whitaker's face flushed red. Whether from embarrassment or defensiveness, it was hard to tell. He fidgeted with the pen in his hand, searching for words that wouldn't come. Finally, he managed to say, "Sir, I assure you this isn't reflective of our values as an institution. If there was any oversight—" "It wasn't an oversight," the man interjected, his voice still calm but laced with conviction. "An oversight is forgetting to send an email or misplacing a document. What happened today was something else entirely. And while I don't expect perfection, I do expect fairness, respect, integrity." Whitaker swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. For someone who prided himself on being in control, he suddenly looked very small. "I understand," he said quietly. "And I apologize sincerely for any discomfort you may have felt. Please, allow me to make this right." The man leaned back in his chair, studying Whitaker carefully. He could see the panic brewing beneath. The surface, the fear of losing not just a potential client but also the reputation of the bank. But he wasn't done yet. "You'll have my business. For now," he said, emphasizing the last two words. "But let me make one thing crystal clear. I expect professionalism and respect moving forward. Not just today, but every time I walk through those doors. If I encounter even a hint of bias or neglect again, I won't hesitate to take my accounts elsewhere. And trust me, word travels fast in this industry." Whitaker nodded vigorously, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. "Absolutely, sir, you have my word. This will never happen again." The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder containing the necessary paperwork. He slid it across the desk toward Whitaker, who grabbed it eagerly as if desperate to prove his competence. As the man signed the documents, Whitaker hovered nearby, offering unnecessary commentary about the benefits of choosing Sterling National Bank. But the man wasn't listening anymore. His mind was already elsewhere, thinking about the bigger picture. He knew that signing these papers wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. When the meeting finally concluded, the man stood up, shook Whitaker's hand firmly, and left the office without another word. Whitaker watched him go, exhaling deeply once the door closed behind him. He slumped back into his chair, relief washing over him, but it was short-lived. Deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter would have lasting consequences, both for him and for the bank. Little did Whitaker know the man had already set wheels in motion that would change everything. The man walked out of the bank, his footsteps steady and deliberate as he stepped onto the bustling sidewalk. The crisp autumn air hit his face, but it did little to cool the thoughts racing through his mind. He wasn't angry, not anymore. At least. Anger had given way to something else, determination. Determination to make sure this moment wasn't just about him. It was about sending a message, one that would resonate far beyond the polished walls of Sterling National Bank. As he climbed into his car, he pulled out his phone and opened a social media app. For a moment, he hesitated. This wasn't a decision to be made lightly. Posting about what happened could stir up controversy, attract attention, maybe even backlash. But staying silent felt worse. If he didn't speak up, who would? And more importantly, how many others had been treated the same way without ever saying a word? He started typing, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. The post was simple but powerful, detailing his experience at the bank, the long wait, the dismissive treatment, the subtle but undeniable signs of bias. He didn't name names or resort to accusations. Instead, he focused on the bigger picture. "This isn't just about me," he wrote. "It's about the countless people who face similar situations every day. It's about holding institutions accountable for their actions and demanding better." Before hitting send, he added a hashtag, "Respect in Business." It wasn't flashy or overly dramatic, but it carried weight. Then, with a deep breath, he pressed publish. Within minutes, the post began to gain traction. People started commenting, first a trickle, then a flood. Some shared their own stories of being ignored, dismissed, or treated unfairly because of their race, gender, or background. Others expressed outrage, calling out the bank for its apparent lack of inclusivity. A few skeptics questioned whether the story was exaggerated, but they were quickly drowned out by the overwhelming support pouring in from all corners of the internet. By evening, the post had gone viral. News outlets picked up the story, turning what had started as a personal account into a national conversation. Headlines blared across websites and TV screens. Bank under fire for alleged discrimination. CEO calls out bias at prestigious institution. Public outcry forces bank to reckon with its practices. The backlash was swift and severe. Customers began closing their accounts en masse, citing the bank's failure to uphold basic standards of respect and fairness. Shareholders grew restless, demanding answers from the board of directors. Social media was ablaze with calls for accountability. Inside the bank, chaos reigned. James Whitaker sat in his office, staring blankly at his computer screen. His inbox was flooded with emails, Angry complaints, urgent memos, and panicked messages from colleagues urging him to issue a statement. He couldn't believe how quickly things had spiraled out of control. Just hours ago, he'd been patting himself on the back for securing a multi-million-dollar client. Now, he was at the center of a scandal that threatened not only his career but the entire institution's reputation. Eleanor Grayson, the CEO of Sterling National Bank, was equally shaken. She had been in meetings all day when her assistant burst into the room, breathless and wide-eyed. "Ma'am, you need to see this," she said, thrusting a tablet toward her. Grayson scanned the headlines, her stomach sinking with each passing second. This wasn't just bad press, it was a full-blown crisis. She immediately called an emergency meeting with the board of directors. The room was tense, filled with murmurs and worried glances. Everyone knew they had to act fast, but no one seemed to know where to start. Finally, Grayson stood up, her voice cutting through the noise. "We can't ignore this," she said firmly. "People are watching us right now, waiting to see how we respond. We have two choices. We can dig in our heels and deny responsibility, or we can take ownership of what happened and use this as an opportunity to do better." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. No one spoke for a moment until one of the board members cleared his throat. "And what exactly does doing better look like?" he asked cautiously. Grayson didn't hesitate. "It means transparency, accountability, real change, not just lip service. We need to show the public that we're serious about addressing these issues, starting today." Meanwhile, outside the boardroom, Whitaker was scrambling to save himself. He drafted a carefully worded apology letter, emphasizing his regret over the incident and promising to improve customer service. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't be enough. The damage had already been done, and no amount of PR spin could erase the truth. Back at home, the man watched the unfolding drama with a mix of satisfaction and unease. He hadn't intended to spark such widespread outrage, but he couldn't deny the impact his post had made. Messages poured in from strangers, thanking him for speaking up, sharing their gratitude and admiration. Friends and family reached out too, offering their support. Yet despite the positive feedback, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The next morning, he received an unexpected call. It was Eleanor Grayson herself requesting a meeting. Her tone was polite but urgent, leaving no room for refusal. Intrigued, he agreed to meet her later that week. As he hung up the phone, he allowed himself a small smile. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. Sterling National Bank and everyone connected to it was about to learn a valuable lesson. What that lesson would be, and how it would shape the future of the institution, remained to be seen. But for now, the man felt a sense of quiet triumph. Sometimes all it takes is one voice to start a ripple effect, and in this case, that ripple was growing into a wave. The meeting between the man and Eleanor Grayson took place in a sleek conference room on the top floor of Sterling National Bank. The panoramic windows offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, but neither of them paid much attention to, and the atmosphere was tense, charged with an unspoken understanding that this conversation would shape the future of the institution, and perhaps the careers of everyone involved. Grayson entered the room first, her presence commanding yet measured. She wore a tailored gray suit that matched her no-nonsense demeanor. Her expression was calm, but there was a flicker of nervous energy in her eyes. When the man walked in moments later, she stood up and extended her hand. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice steady but tinged with sincerity. "I know your time is valuable." He shook her hand firmly, his gaze steady. "It's not about my time," he replied evenly. "It's about what happens next, for me, for your bank, and for everyone who walks through those doors." Grayson nodded, gesturing for him to take a seat. Once they were settled, she didn't waste any time getting to the point. "I want to start by saying how deeply sorry I am for what happened," she began, leaning slightly forward as if to emphasize her words. "What Mr. Whitaker did or failed to do was unacceptable. It doesn't reflect the values we claim to stand for as an institution." Her apology felt genuine, but the man wasn't here just to hear her say sorry. He studied her carefully, searching for signs of authenticity. After a pause, he spoke. Apologies are important, but actions matter more. Words won't fix the damage that's been done, not to me, and certainly not to others who've faced similar treatment without speaking up. Grayson nodded again, her jaw tightening ever so slightly. You're absolutely right, she admitted. That's why I called you here today. We need to turn this moment into an opportunity to rebuild trust, not just with you, but with the entire community. And frankly, we need your help to do that. The man raised an eyebrow, intrigued. My help? Yes, Grayson said, sitting back in her chair. You've already proven that you understand the power of accountability. Your post sparked a conversation that we desperately needed to have, not just within our walls, but across the industry. People are listening to you. They respect you. If anyone can guide us toward meaningful change, it's you. For a moment, the man didn't respond. He looked out the window, watching the sunlight glint off the glass buildings below. Then he turned back to Grayson. Change isn't easy, he said finally, and it doesn't happen overnight. But if you're serious about making things better, I'm willing to work with you. Grayson visibly relaxed, though only a little. Tell me what you have in mind, she urged. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His tone shifted from cautious to resolute. First, you need to acknowledge the problem, not just internally but publicly. Issue a statement, admitting where you fell short and committing to real, tangible improvements. Second, implement comprehensive diversity training for every employee, from the receptionists to the executives. Third, create partnerships with minority-owned businesses and organizations that focus on equity and inclusion. Show the world that you're not just talking about change, you're actually doing it. Grayson listened intently, nodding along as he spoke. When he finished, she scribbled a few notes on a pad of paper before responding. Those are bold steps, but I agree, they're necessary. I'll make sure they happen starting immediately. She paused, then added, but there's something else. Would you be open to joining our advisory board? Your perspective could be invaluable in guiding these efforts. The offer caught him off guard, but he didn't let it show. Joining the advisory board meant taking on a significant responsibility, one that would require time, effort, and potentially putting himself in the spotlight even more than he already had. Still, he couldn't deny the potential impact. If he joined, he could ensure that the changes weren't superficial or temporary. He could hold the bank accountable from the inside. I'll consider it, he said after a thoughtful pause, but only if you're truly committed to following through. This isn't about PR, it's about creating lasting change. Grayson met his gaze squarely. I understand, she said, and I promise you we will follow through. The news of their meeting spread quickly. By the end of the day, rumors were circulating that the man had agreed to collaborate with the bank to address the issues head-on. Journalists reached out for comments, eager to get the full story. Social media buzzed with speculation. Was this a genuine effort to make amends, or just another attempt to save face? Public reactions were mixed. Some praised the man for using his platform to push for meaningful reform. Others accused him of being too lenient, arguing that the bank didn't deserve a second chance. A few skeptics wondered aloud whether this was all part of some elaborate publicity stunt. But regardless of the criticism, one thing was clear. People were paying attention. Inside the bank, the pressure mounted. Employees gathered in hushed conversations, speculating about what changes might come and how it would affect their jobs. Managers scrambled to prepare for the diversity training sessions, which were scheduled to begin within weeks. Meanwhile, James Whitaker found himself under constant scrutiny. While he hadn't been fired, at least not yet, he was essentially on probation. Every interaction he had with clients was monitored closely, and he lived in fear of making another misstep. Despite the tension, there were also glimmers of hope. Several employees approached Grayson privately, expressing gratitude for her willingness to confront the bank's shortcomings. One young teller told her that she'd always felt uneasy about certain practices, but never knew how to speak up. Another staffer shared a story about a time she'd witnessed bias against a customer and regretted staying silent. These conversations, reinforced Grayson's belief that change was possible if they stayed committed. As for the man, he spent the days following the meeting reflecting on what lay ahead. He knew the road wouldn't be easy. Institutions like Sterling National didn't transform overnight. There would be resistance, setbacks, and moments when progress seemed impossibly slow. But he also knew that silence wasn't an option. Not anymore. If he could use his influence to spark real change, then every challenge would be worth it. One evening, as he sat in his home office reviewing the draft of the bank's public statement, he received a text from a friend. "You're shaking things up big time," it read. "Proud of you." He smiled faintly, setting his phone aside. Shaking things up was exactly what he intended to do. Because sometimes, the hardest battles lead to the most meaningful victories. And this battle, one for fairness, respect, and equality, was far from over. Months had passed since that pivotal meeting between the man and Eleanor Grayson, and Sterling National Bank was beginning to look like a different institution altogether. The changes weren't just cosmetic. They ran deep, touching every corner of the organization. From the front desk to the executive suites, there was a palpable shift in energy. Employees walked with purpose, their conversations now peppered with phrases like equity, inclusion, and accountability. Customers noticed it too. For the first time in years, people felt seen, not just as account numbers or dollar signs, but as human beings. The transformation began with small steps, each one building on the last. First came the public apology from Grayson herself. It wasn't buried in fine print or tucked away in an obscure press release. It was front and center, broadcasted across multiple platforms. In her statement, she acknowledged the bank's failures without making excuses. She admitted that systemic biases existed within the institution and promised to root them out. Her words resonated because they were raw, honest, and free of corporate jargon. People appreciated the transparency, even if some remained skeptical about whether real change would follow. Next came the diversity training programs. These weren't your typical half-day seminars where employees nodded politely while checking their phones under the table. No, these sessions were immersive, thought-provoking, and sometimes uncomfortable. Facilitators encouraged open dialogue, creating safe spaces for staff to share their experiences and confront uncomfortable truths. One session stood out in particular, a workshop where employees acted out scenarios based on real-life incidents reported by customers. A young receptionist broke down in tears after realizing how dismissive she'd been toward certain clients without even noticing. Another employee confessed that he'd always assumed wealthy clients were white and had unknowingly treated others differently. These moments of vulnerability became catalysts for growth, helping everyone understand why change was so desperately needed. But perhaps the most impactful initiative was the partnership program. Sterling National Bank teamed up with minority-owned businesses, offering them access to resources, mentorship, and capital they'd previously struggled to secure. The man played a key role in shaping this effort, using his connections to bring innovative startups into the fold. One such company, led by a woman who had faced countless rejections from traditional banks, received funding to scale her eco-friendly packaging venture. When news of the collaboration broke, it sent a powerful message. This wasn't just about optics, it was about leveling the playing field. James Whitaker, meanwhile, found himself navigating uncharted territory. Once a figurehead of authority, he now felt like a student in his own workplace. Every interaction carried weight, every decision scrutinized. At first, he resented the constant oversight, convinced that everyone was waiting for him to slip up again. But over time, something shifted. During one of the diversity workshops, he listened intently as a panel of community leaders discussed the barriers they faced in accessing financial services. Their stories hit close to home. He realized that his own actions, however unintentional, had contributed to those barriers. After the session, Whitaker approached the facilitator, visibly shaken. "I didn't realize," he stammered. "I knew I messed up, but I never stopped to think about the bigger picture." The facilitator smiled gently. "Awareness is the first step," she said. "What matters now is what you do next." Whitaker took those words to heart. He started paying closer attention to how he interacted with clients, going out of his way to ensure no one felt overlooked or undervalued. Slowly but surely, his colleagues began to notice the change. It wasn't perfect. There were still awkward moments, still lingering doubts, but it was progress. And for Whitaker, that was enough. As for the man, his involvement extended far beyond advisory meetings. He became a vocal advocate for equity in banking, speaking at conferences, writing articles, and appearing on panels to discuss the importance of inclusive practices. His presence inspired others to step forward with their own stories, amplifying the conversation and keeping the momentum alive. Yet despite his growing influence, he remained grounded. In interviews, he often redirected praise to the collective effort, emphasizing that true change required teamwork. Still, not everyone was convinced. Critics argued that Sterling National Bank was merely putting on a show, trying to polish its tarnished image without addressing deeper issues. Some former clients refused to return, vowing never to trust the institution again. Even internally, there were whispers of resistance, employees who grumbled about the new policies or dismissed them as unnecessary. Change, after all, is rarely universal. Yet amidst the skepticism, there were undeniable victories. Employee satisfaction surveys showed a marked improvement, with many citing the new initiatives as reasons for renewed pride in their work. Customer feedback painted a similar picture. Wait times were shorter, interactions more respectful, and overall service significantly better. Most importantly, the partnerships with minority-owned businesses began yielding results, not just financially, but socially. Communities that had long felt excluded were finally being welcomed into the fold. One day, as the man reviewed quarterly reports highlighting these successes, he couldn't help but reflect on how far they'd come. It hadn't been easy, far from it, but every challenge had been worth it. This wasn't just about fixing one bank. It was about setting a precedent, proving that institutions could evolve when pushed to do so. As he closed the folder and leaned back in his chair, he allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. The road ahead was still long, filled with obstacles and uncertainties. But for now, he could take solace in knowing that they were moving in the right direction, and sometimes that's all anyone can ask for. A year had passed since the man first walked into Sterling National Bank, and the transformation was undeniable. The once pristine institution, known more for its exclusivity than inclusivity, now stood as a beacon of progress, not just in the financial world, but in the broader fight for equity and fairness. Its story had become a case study discussed in boardrooms, classrooms, and community forums alike. People marveled at how quickly the bank had pivoted, turning what could have been a crippling scandal into an opportunity for growth. For the man, this journey wasn't just about holding the bank accountable. It was about proving that change was possible, even within systems resistant to it. He often thought back to that chilly autumn morning when he'd sat in the waiting area, unnoticed and undervalued. Back then, he couldn't have imagined the ripple effect his actions would create. But here they were, a year later, with tangible results to show for their efforts. One of the most visible changes was the culture within the bank itself. Employees no longer treated customers based on assumptions or biases. Receptionists greeted everyone warmly, regardless of appearance or background. Managers took extra care to ensure every client felt heard and respected. Even small gestures like remembering someone's name or offering personalized assistance made a big difference. These shifts weren't accidental. They were intentional, born out of months of training, reflection, and accountability. James Whitaker, once a symbol of everything wrong with the old system, had become one of its strongest advocates. His transformation hadn't been easy. There were days when self-doubt crept in, moments when old habits threatened to resurface. But each time he reminded himself why he needed to keep going, not just for his career, but for the sake of doing better. Over time, his colleagues began to respect him again, not because of his title, but because of the genuine effort he put into changing. By the end of the year, Whitaker had earned a reputation as someone who truly understood the importance of inclusion and wasn't afraid to champion it. Eleanor Grayson also found herself reflecting on the past 12 months. As CEO, she had faced immense pressure from shareholders, media outlets, and even her own team. Some questioned whether she was moving too fast, while others accused her of not doing enough. Balancing these expectations had been exhausting, but she never wavered in her commitment to the cause. In interviews, she spoke openly about the challenges of leading through change, emphasizing that leadership wasn't about avoiding mistakes, it was about learning from them. Her vulnerability resonated with people, earning her newfound admiration both inside and outside the company. But perhaps the most profound impact was felt by the communities the bank served. Through its partnerships with minority-owned businesses, Sterling National had helped foster economic growth in areas long neglected by traditional lenders. Entrepreneurs who had struggled to secure loans were now thriving, creating jobs and opportunities for others. One such success story belonged to a young woman who ran a nonprofit focused on STEM education for underprivileged youth. With the bank's support, she expanded her program to reach hundreds more students, inspiring the next generation of innovators. Stories like hers became testaments to the power of collaboration and trust. The man attended the nonprofit's annual gala, where he watched proudly as the founder accepted an award for her contributions to the community. As she spoke about overcoming obstacles and finding allies in unexpected places, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, not just for her achievements, but for the role he'd played in making them possible. Afterward, they chatted briefly, and she thanked him for using his platform to drive meaningful change. "You didn't just open doors," she said. "You showed us that we belong in those rooms." That sentiment stayed with him long after the event ended. It reminded him of why he'd spoken up in the first place, not for recognition or revenge, but to remind others that their voices mattered too. Change, he realized, wasn't something you achieved alone. It required collective effort, courage, and a willingness to listen. As the year drew to a close, the man reflected on the lessons he'd learned along the way. He thought about the countless conversations he'd had with Grayson, Whitaker, employees, clients, and strangers alike. Each one had taught him something new about resilience, empathy, and the complexities of human nature. He thought about the critics who doubted his intentions and the supporters who cheered him on. And he thought about the future, what lay ahead, for the bank, for the people it served, and for himself. He knew the work wasn't finished. Bias and inequality wouldn't disappear overnight, and there would always be room for improvement. But he also knew that progress wasn't linear. It came in fits and starts, in moments of triumph and setbacks alike. What mattered most was staying committed to the journey. In December, the bank hosted a special event to celebrate the milestones achieved over the past year. Staff members, clients, partners, and community leaders gathered in the Grand Hall, decorated with twinkling lights and festive garlands. Eleanor Grayson delivered a heartfelt speech, thanking everyone for their hard work and dedication. She acknowledged the challenges they'd faced and the strides they'd made, urging them to continue pushing forward. When she introduced the man as a guest speaker, the room erupted in applause. Standing at the podium, he felt a mix of emotions: gratitude, humility, and a quiet determination. "When I walked into this bank a year ago," he began, his voice steady, "I didn't expect my experience to spark a movement. I simply wanted to be treated fairly. But sometimes, fairness isn't just about individual moments. It's about creating systems that work for everyone." He paused, scanning the crowd. What happened here wasn't perfect. There were missteps, disagreements, and moments of doubt. But through it all, we kept moving forward. We listened, we adapted, and most importantly, we grew. That's what true progress looks like. It's messy, imperfect, and ongoing. The audience nodded in agreement, many moved to tears. When he concluded his remarks, the applause was thunderous, echoing off the high ceilings. For a moment, he allowed himself to bask in the energy of the room, the shared sense of accomplishment, hope, and possibility. After the event, as he stepped outside into the crisp winter air, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would still be challenging, but he was ready, because he now understood something fundamental. Change begins with discomfort. And if you're willing to lean into that discomfort, if you're willing to demand better, you can inspire others to do the same. And so the man walked away from the bank that night, not as a critic or outsider, but as a catalyst for lasting change. The story of Sterling National Bank wasn't just about one incident or one person. It was about what happens when people come together to build something better, something fairer, something stronger. Because in the end, it's not about perfection. It's about progress, and that, he realized, was worth fighting for.